I'd like to call to order the regular July meeting of the BET at 6:32 PM. Thank you. The first order is the call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I think we're going to have a little bit, we have a new agenda item for tonight. We have been asked to do an executive session to discuss a legal matter, the legal matter of,
I was going to make a motion.
oh, sorry, yes. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, I move to add an executive session to discuss ongoing litigation, Cordic versus Town of Greenwich et al. And I'm suggesting that the executive session come after the assessor's report.
I'll second that. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll second it. Okay.
So that's a motion by Karen, seconded by Stephen.
Your microphone.
I'm sorry. A motion by Karen Faciotis, Chair of our Law Committee, and seconded by Stephen Selps. Can we pass that by unanimous consent?
Yes.
Okay, so just for the public, because this is important, we are going to take up item 2, routine budget adjustments. We're going to hear our assessor's report, and then after item 3, we are going to executive session. I would expect the items 2 and 3 to be quite quick. Thank you. Does everyone have their mics off?
We're doing the routine
Oh, no, I'm
first,
sorry.
right? Yeah.
Doing the routine and assessor first.
Okay. Item 2, request for budget adjustments.
Okay, we have 3 routine applications. We have first SL1. This is a year-end transfer for the school lunch fund in the amount of $131,000. We have the Health Department HT1, the approval to use the PHEP grant in the amount of $36,368. And NW5, Nathaniel Witherell, $100,000 year-end transfer for professional services.
I move that we approve these.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Leslie Tarkington, Leslie Moriarty, second. Any objections to passing this with unanimous consent? Hearing none, that passes 12-0-0. Okay, item 3 is our assessor's report. Our assessor, Lauren Elliott. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for Mr. Chairman and fellow members of the BET, I'd like to present the assessor's report for July 2023. As you're probably all aware, the tax bills went out on June 15th. They are due August 1st. Currently, the assessor's office is responding and addressing any taxpayers' concerns in prorating motor vehicles as required. Certificate of occupancies, we have completed all the COs that have been issued since October 1st. That added to the 22 grand list roughly about $18 million worth of assessed value, and that equates to about $211,454 of additional revenue to the fiscal year this year. As far as litigation is concerned, we reduced our litigation by 4 appeals. First thing I'd like to mention is the 2015 appeal that we have outstanding. That is scheduled for trial next week, the 25th through the 27th. We hope it goes forward. This time it's been scheduled a number of times and it keeps on getting delayed. But hopefully next week we will finally litigate this, the 2015 tax appeal. We have settled 4 of them, or with one on the 2017 grand list was a commercial appeal. We reduced the assessment by, or the fair market value by roughly $350,000. That was a tax loss of about $14,597. On the 2020 grand list, we had 1 residential appeal withdrawn. The commercial property that was settled on the 2020 grand list, we had a reduction roughly of about $42,000 in taxes. 1 residential appeal on the 2022 grand list, it was the only one that was filed this year. That one was also withdrawn. So we're now down to 94 tax appeals. Does anybody have any questions for me this evening?
I move the acceptance of the
I'll second that motion.
Okay, that motion from Jeff Raymer, seconded by Leslie Tarkington. Any objections? That passes 12-0-0 by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay. Can I get a motion to enter executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Karen Fastliotis, seconded by Leslie Tarkington. Any objections? Okay. We enter executive session by a vote of 12-0-0. Okay, thank you. We left executive session at 7:11 PM. Okay, the next item is item 4, the Controller's Report. Peter Minosky, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members, Controllers Report. I give a monthly update on the ARPA, American Rescue Plan, and it was put on the agenda for last week on the Budget Committee, and I gave an update there. So what I'll do is I'll stick with the basic question during the update was any risk involved in any of these 47 ARPA appropriated projects. Ms. Fasciolatos asked that question a couple months ago. Ms. Tarkington was last week. The only risk I see, and I don't like to use the word risk because there's a lot of time still to go, we have no movement on 2 projects. There's the Affordable Trust Fund, $1.1 million, and then there's a Grass Island Sewer project for $2 million. And my answer at that meeting is that if there is any concern, I'll bring it to the attention of the BET late in the year so that it's addressed during the normal budgetary process. And we can go, if we need to repurpose, we'll resurrect the working group, which will start with Ben Branyan, Town Administrator, First Selectman Fred, and BET, Budget Committee, BET, and RTM. The annual audit, we made it the last day, June 30th. As you all know, it was delayed because of the Nathaniel Witherall issue. We filed with the OPM, the Government Finance Officers Association. I notified Moody's and S&P who are looking for the reports. Being that that's over with, we'll move on and start with the new audit. And during the Treasurer's report, I'll give an economic, there was no economic report that's normally given by Roland. And by the way, Roland got jury duty, so he just told me about an hour ago. I hope he doesn't get a long case. I went in May, and my case was dismissed the same day. So I will give that during the Treasurer's report, and I will open it up to any questions on the Controller's report.
Laura?
Just a question about the Assistant Treasurer position. Has that position been posted?
Town Administrator Ben Branyan released it about 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, and we're expediting that position. So it'll be posted probably tomorrow.
Miriam?
This is actually more of a comment than a question, but just because we're a little off cycle with our IAC meetings so that we could give the Vanguard, who manages our OPEB assets, a little more time to put together their reports. And so it's not as explicit here, but just wanted to note that the performance for fiscal year 23 from OPEB is going to be about 12.5%, which is versus a discount rate of 6.75. So we'll do the actuary report later on in the year. It doesn't follow the same timeline as the retirement board. It's done a little later, but that is a really nice number to post because that gets smoothed for 5 years. So hopefully the healthcare costs don't surprise us again this year, but just given that it was a rocky start with Vanguard, not because of them, but just because of the timing of when we invested last year, I just wanted to make that public comment on that.
Thank you. Leslie?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up. During the June meeting, I had asked the chair to get an update from the head of the Affordable Housing Trust about the ARP funding, because those funds are conditioned, and the condition's not, they're not related to specific investments. they're related to whether the structure of the trust fund and how they want to use the funds is consistent with the ARP rules. I was just wondering if you had gotten any feedback.
I have not yet, but thank you for the question. But there were a few special meetings and
thought about
others.
it now,
Yes, there are
yeah.
a few things that came up in the last few weeks. But thank you for that question.
Okay.
And it is an outstanding item. Thank you. Harry?
Yeah, just because I see it on here, the Havermeyer Building water damage claim, do we have any ideas that anybody over there made a decision about what they're doing with the print shop?
There's somewhat of a disconnect on the insurance. I don't know the answer to that, but I followed up with the risk manager on completing the claim. And as a lot of you know, there's a lot of turnover over there. And the key person who always helped us with the numbers is now working in New Canaan with the former business office manager. I don't know the answer to that I could follow up on the print shop. Yep.
Jeff?
So it does seem to me on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that we should be cautious maybe to try and set up a structure, a procedural structure of at what point we as the BET will be wishing to do something else with the funds, and we should be, I think, communicating that to the trust fund. The $1.1 million was broken into two components, as I understood. One was that they were funds that they were at liberty to spend once they had confirmed to us through an opinion from council that they could do this revolving loan structure and meet the requirements. The second remainder of the funds was conditioned on matching funds being raised on a fundraising process. So it seems to me we have kind of three things involved. One, to get that promised letter from the outside counsel that they've been talking to, opining that the revolving loan fund meets the requirements, which Leslie was talking about. The second is whether or not they have candidates for the loans in place once that's been done, because funds have to be committed by the end of 2024 and have to be expended by the end of 2026. If it's not going to work, if there's no opinion from council or the funding arrangement's not attractive, frankly, to developers, or there's no fundraising to be had, they're not going to be able to meet that condition, then I'd like to be sure that we communicated to them that we need them to have I'm making this up now, we need them to have satisfied those issues by the 1st of December this year. And if not, then we're going to be recalling some funds. I don't want to surprise them with things. I don't want us to be left unprepared, that we didn't have dates in mind by which these things need to be satisfied. It just seems to me that it's been left a little murky, and I don't know that we know where we stand. I don't know that they know where they stand, and I think we should be trying to set up some structure. I don't know how to go about that exactly.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd just make two comments on that. One is, to your point about the timing issue, this risk was anticipated. However, in the conditions, the date was July 2024. That was when, remember, that was when they were supposed to say, look, we can't use the money, we're forfeiting the money, and then the BET and the process that Pete mentioned would be repurposed, and the town would effectively have 5 or 6 months to figure that out. Now to your point, I think we're all, I wouldn't perplexed or not necessarily concerned, but observing that not much seems to be happening. No one's coming to us with requests. So I think right now it really is it's on their plate to come to us and give us an update or request, because we already set a timeline. But I do agree with the sentiment from Leslie and you that we want to make sure this thing works. So maybe we can take the initiative, and I think that's what the request was. But right now the process are already set as to when they would return the money. Okay, thank you. David.
Would it be appropriate to include in the September agenda this item, that they come before the full BET and give us an update, or go through one of the committees? I'm not sure which committee would be. But actually, I think coming to the full BET would not be a bad idea, because I think unless we hear from them in some detail, we'll wind up getting into November, December, and
So I will make a comment that they did come before the Budget Committee during the budget cycle.
yeah, I know.
And, I think an update is probably appropriate, someplace.
I mean, I would suggest in that sense, since they did go to the Budget Committee during the budget cycle, probably to start there, and then we can go to the full BT after that. But that's something we have, a couple months, several weeks to figure out. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't want to push it too much, but I think, September would be, I think these are legitimate questions that we're all asking. And so whether it goes before the Budget Committee in September, or we should really think of, I mean, I don't want to put a motion out or anything, but I mean, is it something that makes sense? Am I the only one that's saying this?
No, we can put it on the Budget Committee. You're okay with that? We can put it on the Budget Committee agenda in September. We've got,
Perfect.
I think what Dan was saying, we have a couple of months to execute or.
I think that's the right place for it to start.
That's fine,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions for Pete? Okay, can I get a motion to accept the controls?
So I move that we accept the controller's report.
I'll second.
Leslie Moriarty, any objections? Okay, that passes 12-0. Our treasurer's report, thank you.
Okay, you all have a copy of the treasurer's report, and if I could bring your attention to the back page. The back page is the fiscal year to date, and I'll go through these methodically and try to incorporate economic conditions results as a result of the audit, and at the end, we can go back to the report that Roland generates. General fund, we closed today, and on a budgetary basis, the fund balance was, ended up with a 63,000, I should say the results were a $63,081 deficit. We literally broke even within 100,000. We still have 60 days. We do a search for unrecorded liabilities, and we do occasionally revenues pop up. So as of right now, we're break even on the general fund. The highlights which are presented every month is basically the conveyance tax had a surplus of $1,153,000. The building permits were $1,002,000, and then the highlight of the positive variances was the interest income for obvious reasons. The interest rate started in the January of a year and a half ago, and we budgeted only, as is reported there, $1 million, and we had a surplus of 4.7. So the general fund broke even at this point. On a GAAP basis, they're actually going to have a surplus of a couple million because there was about $3 million of revenue that the auditors would not let us book last year. They flipped it to unearned revenue, and this year, next year, 23, it'll flip and become positive revenue. OPEB, Miriam Cruiser gave you the good news on the OPEB. They did well compared to the retirement fund. They did a lot better. The retirement fund, I don't have the final June 30th, but they were a fraction. They were between 0 and 50 basis points. As you all know, the discount rate is 6%, so that's not good. But they should be a little bit north of that because June was pretty good. And we won't have the numbers for that until probably October. One of the things that always holds up, to Miriam's point, is the Greg Stump will come in July. He'll give I'll send him a P&L. He'll come up with a preliminary annual contribution for next year. And we're always waiting for the alternative investments, and they don't come until August, September, and they trail as much as 3 months. The capital projects, the fiscal year, not capital non-recurring, we started with 12.4 million. As you all know, we took 8 million out to fund capital projects, and we had closed out about 4 million, so we're back up to $8 million on the capital non-recurring. Parking fund, this was a surprise. As you know, during the budget process, we were looking at a potential loss there. They basically had a $1 million surplus, which is good news, and they went from 1.7 to about 2.7. Sewer maintenance is another one where we're trying to methodically draw down the large fund balance, which you could see is 16 million. It went down about 3 million. And we took money out this year, and what we'll do is, during the budget process, we'll give you a more analytical analysis of what capital projects are out there and which ones are lapsing, and try to amortize this over, with the agreement of the BET over the next 3, 4, 5 years. The risk fund, as you all know, it's 2.681. We've only got two large cases on the table. We talked about one earlier, no further comment. And then there's one other high-risk case with I believe it's a 1.5 SIR, self-insured retention. Golf course was another one. This would be considered much more than a birdie. I would say this is an eagle. They went from 2.3 to 3. Their fund balance is over $3 million. They've had 2 phenomenal years. What was unusual, going back to March of 20 with COVID, and it's the same situation with the conveyance tax and the building permits, where everybody thought we were going to have tremendous losses to revenues. The golf course has been phenomenal for the last couple of years as far as their returns. One final fund is at the very bottom is the school lunch. Again, that was a fund that we were supposed to give $834,000 last year. They had a tremendous surplus, so that went to the general fund. We didn't have to subsidize the school lunch. And you can see that they're over $2 million as far as the fund balance. I'll stop there. Any questions on Treasurer's report or any other results?
Laura?
Can I just ask about the risk fund? Does that include all the settlements that we've approved publicly to date? Is that after those?
That has, the answer is yes. Excluding a prior conversation. The ones that are, the answer is yes.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Leslie Tarkington, second. Did I see a hand over here?
Leslie Moriarty.
Okay, no, I think it was David Weisbrod. Okay, any objections? Yes, he seconded, yes. Any objections? Okay, that's accepted by a vote of 12-0. Thank you very much. Okay, I believe we're at item 9, old business. And item 9, old business, Old Greenwich Cost Estimator Project, discussion and possible vote on a motion to discontinue the project and release the encumbered funds. Do we have a motion? Leslie Moriarty.
Yes, I'd like to make the following motion. The motion is to discontinue the BET Cost Estimator Project on Old Greenwich School and to release, the encumbered funds.
Do you have a second? Okay, that's Leslie Moriarty, second Jeff Raymer. Rationale? Thank you.
So, yes, so the BET started this process in April. We approved a policy for how to manage these projects and then approved by a majority vote to target Old Greenwich School. And the request at that point in time was before the building committee had its schematic design and worked on more detail regarding the project. The specific request is both to do an independent evaluation of the renovation project, as to provide data on comparable or geographically close other public and private school projects on costs of construction. And then third was to estimate the cost of building a new school with a comparable enrollment projection for the current Old Greenwich School, and to do this all under $15,000. Now, at that time, as I said, there was no design development And so there was no real data on which an outside estimator would be able to perform this work. And clearly, for a new school, there are no ed specs, which is the province of the Board of Education, really to determine what should go into a school. But if we fast forward 3 months later, it was approved, and the controller had given the assignment to select, to get estimates and select an estimator. 3 months fast forward, we're here now. After a lot more development by the Old Greenwich School Building Committee, they have gotten their schematic design. They have had both their architect and an outside cost estimator, their project manager, to do cost estimates. Those cost estimates were reconciled, and those estimates were presented to this board at the end of June. But they also, on their own, took a look at what a new school would cost. The building committee, I think we would say, has the most information about the site constraints, the most information about the status of the building and the abatement requirements of demolishing that building, and therefore, and made estimates about how you would educate 400 students during a period of time when a building was to be demolished and a new one constructed. They also know a lot more about the site constraints, if I hadn't said that before, the field conditions. We know it's a low-lying level. There are some building codes which would impact the cost of construction. But they presented us with an analysis in June, which based it on about $659 per square foot for a building. They gave a range of building sizes, one of which is very close to the New Lebanon building. They gave it at 65,000 square feet, and the New Lebanon School is 62,000 square feet. But they also gave estimates for the abatement, the demolition, the relocation of the students during that period of time, and that came up to $66 million. So my question, but given this new information, and this board has these rough estimates, which is really all a cost estimator can do, given the status of the information available, that it is really not a good use of town funds to duplicate this work that's been done by several bodies and verified, and therefore, I think this body should recognize the value of $15,000 of the town's funds and discontinue the project.
Thank you. Discussion? Jeff?
There's another item on the agenda for tonight. It's item number 11, which I view as being related. I don't know how you want to divide time between the two. But I have concerns that go beyond just the concerns that Mrs. Murray already raised. And that was that I've lost confidence in the process that's before us. This might be more responsive to number 11, but I feel like I have to raise it here in this context. There was a lengthy discussion. It did not take place in April. It took place on the prior to and then finally at the 27th of March at our meeting. And at that meeting, after a lot of dialogue, after prior meetings for a pre-read only, there were a series of motions that were made. I voted in favor of the cost estimator. A majority of us did, but it was under certain circumstances, and those circumstances are not unimportant to me. Number one, I was trying to have the process of who was selected to be not politicized in any way, and it was important that the provision before us provided that the decision as to who is going to be the estimator was made by the project manager, and the project manager was identified as being the controller. Secondly, it was to be a sterile process, a process in which, and it was a motion that I made, and it was very specific. It said, at no point, not before, during, et cetera, at no point may any member of the BET, directly or indirectly, communicate or confer with the estimator until such time as the estimator has submitted its written draft report to the project manager. That condition was carried forward verbatim into the instrument that we approved that night. Where do we find ourselves now? If I'm understanding the facts correctly, maybe I understand the facts incorrectly, that we have bids, and the bids that are being taken seriously have come to us through a member of the BET, not the sterile circumstance that we had contractually agreed was going to be our process. That means to me that that's a bidder who views that member of the BET as being their source of business. It's impossible to know what dialogue did or did not take place between the member of the BET and the bidder. It was interesting to me that at least one of the bidders then must have had a further dialogue, because that bid that they take was withdrawn and another bid was offered in its place to get to within the $15,000 figure that we spoke about. The whole point of having there be no communication is to avoid the awkwardness of having to discuss, well, what were your conversations? What weren't your conversations? The agreement that we made was that we're not going to have that conversation. There will be no conversations. There'll be no dialogue whatsoever between a proposed cost estimator and any member of the BET until such time as the estimator has ostensibly completed its work and submitted its draft final findings in writing to the BET. So now we find ourselves in a situation in which there is a reluctance of the project manager to be making the choice. And if I'm reading paragraph 11 of our agenda correctly, we're now going to start to substitute the BET to be making the choice. That was not our agreement. And we'll be looking at bids in which I do not have the sterile arrangement, in which there's been no conversation, no dialogue, no communication of any kind between a BET member and them. Last point is, if in fact you're really going to be asking under agenda item number 11 that the BET exercise some decision about making a selection from among the bidders, then this member of the BET, maybe other members of the BET, haven't done the homework that they're supposed to do when they're making a choice. I know nothing about these bidders. I don't know their background. I don't know the work they've done. It's inappropriate to ask a board to suddenly substitute itself and start to make a decision as to which bidder should we be picking. I know nothing about these bidders. That isn't how the process was supposed to work. And so since we're no longer going to have an arrangement in which the selection is going to be made by the controller, since we no longer have an arrangement in which the estimators are people who have had no conversation at any point with any member of the BET, and since we're being thrust at the last moment in a setting in which we're theoretically supposed to be making decisions about who's the best bidder for this, we're no longer under the protocol that we agreed to on the 27th of March. And that being the case, I don't think we have a protocol in place at all. And so on that basis, I support the motion of Mrs. Moriarty.
Any discussion? Yeah, Nisha?
Yeah, I just want to make two comments. I'll start with responding to Ms. Moriarty's comments on the original motion. One, I think the spirit of, I think, Leslie, you raised 2 points. One is, the original estimate was being brought up when there wasn't schematics, there wasn't too much information. So how were we actually retaining an estimator to go about this? And I think one of the, at least for myself, we had a $38 million from the Board of Ed potential request coming up on decision day on a project that we knew very little about, and we needed some more comfort prior to approving that. So the $38 million there was a basis for that estimate. So the idea for getting an independent estimator involved was to use that same basis to come up with an independent cost. So, just to address that I agree, there weren't schematics, but the idea was to use the same information that the architect had to come up and give us an independent thought. On the second piece, the idea of independence was, I think, lost upon this cost estimator because although it's an independent cost estimator, this estimator works for the architect of the current, well, it's the internal in-house kind of, it's not the in-house estimator, but it's the estimator go-to. It's not a truly independent. I think Mr. Raymer kind of referenced this as well. When the estimator is in discussions with the person who hires them, there is some responsibility to them for the same argument that Mr. Raymer just made. I'll talk about the second part. I'm actually quite disappointed to hear Mr. Raymer's comments on that there was some implication of that there was some foul play and how this process was carried out. So just to be clear, there was one meeting that the two liaisons met with the controller. Mr. Selps did not come to that meeting. I don't know if there was a misunderstanding or whatnot, but the controller and myself went along with that meeting. There was, at that meeting, Mr. Minarski let us know that he had one proposal to date, and I think he was expecting a second. And we discussed how we were going to go about getting additional proposals. And we made a phone call together in that room, and I connected Mr. Minarski. Mr. Minarski was on that conversation. Mr. Selps was not present, and handed it off to him to go from there. So there has been no discussion with the estimator beyond that. And we did the same for two other estimators, where we brought in two other individuals to come in and bid on this. The estimator that, the individual that I recommended was the same one that the CMS Building Committee was using. I am not in the real estate business. I don't have any background in knowing any cost estimators per se. As you know, I sit on the Central Middle Building Committee. We had interviewed this process, and that was the same estimator that they were using. So they were interested. They came in on and decided to bid on this. We did the same for two other separate estimators. When it was noted that we had no estimate other than one, which was a one-man person out of New Hampshire, we recognized that there were three estimates above the $15,000 limit. And I asked the controller, can we go back to these, all three of them? Can we go back to all three of them? And I have explained to them that the budget is 15 if they want to rebid. And we did do precisely that. And one of them came back and came within budget. So again, there has been no conversations. I don't know these individuals personally. I've never worked with them in the past. This is the same firm that the CMS Building Committee has hired. And I don't know if this is appropriate for this or we want to hold off on until executive session. But I do find it disappointing that there's some implication that the process was not followed.
Any other discussion? David?
Well, I think what I just heard is that the condition that was part of the March 29th protocol was violated. Nobody's saying foul play or otherwise. Simply stated that at no point would any member of the BET engage in any discussion, directly or indirectly, until such time as a draft report is submitted. We just heard that there was no compliance with that. So there you go. The protocol that was discussed was violated. I'm not accusing anybody of foul play or anything else. I'm just simply saying, as a matter of fact, we agreed to a protocol and the protocol was not adhered to. Therefore, the process is tainted. QED, there's nothing more to be said. It's been reported as such a moment ago. Now, I was opposed to this cost estimator idea from the outset. I voted against it when it came up to begin with, and I had good reason to feel that this would go in a wrong direction. I have better reason to think of it now. In addition, since then, we have new information from the building committee. Essentially, this is a vote of utter no confidence in the building committee. Building committee came up with a very valid estimate at no cost as to what the new building would cost. We have no ed specs, no design. Why in the world would we spend $15, never mind $15,000, on a tainted process that has no validity and no substance and no value?
We have Nisha and then Harry.
So just to be clear, this is what the process that the BET approved. Once the estimator is selected and hired for the approved project, the project manager will serve as the point of contact with the estimator. At no point may any member of the BET communicate with the estimator. So as we know, no estimator has been hired. The process has not been broken during the hiring process. The discussion precisely to utilize liaisons to work with the project manager was to increase the amount of proposals that we received. Again, we sat in an office together with the controller. My colleague did not show at that meeting, and Mr. Minarski and I sat down and discussed how we were going to get more proposals. So I think that was always part of the understanding here. There has been no broken from what we all approved. There has been no estimator and hired. So right now, during the hiring process, the liaisons absolutely can go out and reach out and encourage others to bid on this process. That was, we laid that out in the document.
Harry?
Yeah, and Nisham just made the essential point I was going to make in simpler terms. There was no estimator, so there was no ability to talk to an estimator. There were only bidders. So the letter of the agreement has not been violated in any shape or form. And I think an apology is in order.
Jeff, and then Leslie.
I'll defer. Well, so let me be very clear. The reason that the instrument said what it said at no point was that we were never wanted to get into the question of the assurances were being given that the conversations were innocent and there was nothing that was said that would taint anything. No, we were never to get to that point because there were to be no conversations. And it is simply Philadelphia lawyerism to say that, well, technically he isn't the estimator, so I can say any damn thing I want to until the moment that he's hired. I can poison the well any way that I want, because if I do all that before the technical hiring, it works. No, that's not how it's supposed to work.
But I think your point is, okay, I've got the document in front of me. The point of the wording around the who can speak and when to the candidates relates to the engagement process, not the hiring process. I can accept your point if you're saying you want to look at it beyond the specific, technical words. I appreciate that. But I think I would prefer if we could just not talk about poisoning wells, et cetera. I mean, I get your point. You're saying you want to look at it broader than what the document says.
Well, but I'm sorry, but the poisoning of the well is exactly the point. And I've been asked to apologize for pointing out the fact that somebody has had conversations that she never was supposed to have. And, fervently, I declined to apologize. I'm making it a point that I think it's important for this board to absorb, and that is that there were two elements. There were several elements, but there were two elements in the document that we adopted that were critical elements, and both of which have been breached. And then it gets to the third point that I had earlier made, and that is, well, then if the choice is going to be made among these people and not by the controller, then I take it from item number 11 that you're expecting the BET to make a selection and for you to exercise a majority vote to impose somebody where the voting process is on candidates that we individually have not had an opportunity to properly vet. And I think all of that's inappropriate.
Did that cover your points, Leslie?
No, I wanted to bring the conversation back to, which is one of the comments that I made in supporting my motion, which is the BET has new information over the past 3 months. When we met with the Old Greenwich Building Committee at the end of June, I don't believe a single question from the voting majority of this board was directed towards the estimates provided to us. There wasn't an engagement in the conversation of the work they've done. It was almost as if that work was being dismissed. And somehow, a building committee, which is much closer to the specific attributes, positives, negatives, the building conditions of that site were being dismissed in favor of an independent cost estimator. I also question what we're doing with that information. What are we going to learn from it that the information we already have in front of us is going to change or modify or convince members of this board for one action for another, because we have the data in front of us. So I'm questioning the approach to this project. You know, I already made comments in March and in April when we did this, not supportive of it. I know that ultimately Ms. Tarkington will remind people that I voted in favor, but that's because I felt I was handcuffed, because it was a condition of the A&E funding, and therefore if you don't support it, then you're going to put blockades to the building committee to continue their work. So there really wasn't a good way to vote on that particular item. But here we are today, new information. I am presenting to all members of this BET to consider what additional information is going to be gained by spending $15,000 to bring a new person in who is going to FOI the information that's already out there and say yes or no, I might change this comma, I might change that comma. And meanwhile, we put our controller in a difficult situation, which none of us really want to do, to determining how to move ahead. So I think that there is enough information based on fact to say that this project at this point in time does not make sense.
Okay, I'm going to give it to Bill, and then I'm going to make some closing comments, and then we go to a vote.
Was a sentence here, perhaps it is missed by some, in the hiring document, the document we all approved by a vote of 11 to 1. The sentence says, qualified bids will be circulated to the liaisons. That means what it means. It means that the bids, which is what Ms. Aurora reviewed with Mr. Minarski in the meeting that Stephen didn't have a chance to make. So if the document in question says qualified bids get submitted to the liaisons, clearly that supersedes this interpretation that we've been offered this evening, that this, at no point the estimator shall talk to anybody. It was clearly foreseen that at that point, the bids would be reviewed by the liaisons, members of the BET. So one other thing, the larger issue here is that this is a process we discussed longly. We passed it. We reviewed many and several amendments, which passed. I made this one pass by abstaining on it. But this was passed 11 to 1. So this board decided to do this. And so in my observation, what we're hearing today is a post facto review to say, yeah, we all agreed to it. We agreed to it 11-1. But here today, I want to revote it or toss it or set it aside or ignore it. And that's not the way we should proceed.
I'm sorry, I
Okay,
need to respond.
Jeff, and then, can I go?
So let's be clear, the liaison, it's explicit. The liaison's role is to advise the project manager and to provide transparency. There's no provision for the liaisons to be in any communication whatsoever with the estimator. On the contrary, the instrument is clear that no BET member, liaisons included, shall have any communication with the estimator. And that's the critical factor, a point that was raised, discussed, and voted on, and became a part of the instrument, and is now being breached.
Nisha, and then Karen.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly comment on Jeff's and then not make any further comments on that, because to be quite honest, I'm finding Mr. Raymer's comments quite offensive in regards to just doing that there is some kind of lack of trust. There was, again, one conversation with this bidder, which was made with a joint phone call with Mr. Minarski on the call. I said, hello, this is Nisha Aurora. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Minarski, who will be running this project. And that was the extent of the conversation. So I'd like to just move away from that. I'd like to go back to the actual content of the discussion as Ms. Moriarty is presenting. Leslie, I think you're making a good point that, well, we already have a bid. we already have this information, why do we need an additional? And I just ask most people to think about this. If you were building your own house, you were doing a renovation project, and your architect came in and said, listen, I think it's going to cost $40 million, would you go out and get a second bid? I think we're not dismissing the existing bid that the Old Greenwich Building Committee has produced. The idea is the significant capital outlay. We should always try and get multiple quotes, processes, bids to understand what the appropriate funding should be. So I don't think we are dismissing the work of the Old Greenwich Building Committee. I think they've done good work. I think the idea is to get additional information to give us confidence that that number is a good number.
Karen?
Yeah, and I'd also like to just address the comment that not a single substantive question was asked by the majority party that night where the building committee presented. I do recall questions relating to the climate conditions and the floodplain conditions that this school is in partly. So I take exception to that and would just like to point that out for the record. And also the fact that we received it literally 24 hours prior to the meeting, and there was a lot of information to go through.
Okay, it's going to be Miriam and then Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, what, as I think...
Is your mic on?
Yeah, and I'll bring it down. Sorry, I'm usually loud. As I think through sort of our initial votes and why I'm sort of uncomfortable where this process has turned, it's not even with the idea of members of this board kind of, knowing names out there and even saying, hey, there's this process going on in town and maybe you should consider it. We're looking for a cost estimator. The bit that makes me truly uncomfortable was that change of bid. That to me, I don't know how it doesn't feel uncomfortable to have somebody who's qualified come in, know what we want per the documents they received, come in at a very high number, way above, and then suddenly say, no, now I'm going to come in just shy of that 15,000. That doesn't smell good to me. I don't know what, suddenly they are not doing, but that, we talk about a lot about these thresholds of 15,000, I believe now it's 25,000, and how sometimes bidders seem to just knowingly come right below that number and how that feels a little icky. Well, I'm feeling a little icky on a cut, I believe, of 80% on what a qualified bidder was suddenly now able to discount. That feels icky to me.
Can I just respond to Miriam? I think, Miriam, that's a good question, but I think instead of in a public hearing trying to assume that there was some foul play, could just picked up the phone and called me and said, Nisha, do you know what happened? Because I can tell you what happened. I'm not sure if Mr. Selbst filled you in, but I'll fill the public in as to what precisely happened. The first bidder that came in under 15,000 was aware that the project budget was 15,000. That was the first bidder that came into this. The other three, we never gave them disclosure. This was the next three bidders that came in. One came in at 19, one came in around 40, one came in around 70. I sat down with Pete and I said, listen, these are really far off. What are we going to do? Should we just go out and is there an opportunity to go back to these bidders to see if they can revise their bid? Obviously, there's a misunderstanding on scope since they're so far apart. Mr. Minarski wasn't sure if we could go back. I went in and had a conversation with Ben Brannion, our town administrator, and said, is there an opportunity to go back to these bidders or should we just nix it like a proper RFP where you just start over? He said, because this is an RFQ, which is a request for quote, we have the opportunity to go back to these bidders and say, listen, this is our budget. Do you want to work with us or not? So we went back to all of them that we had that picked up the phone and were interested, because the 90 or 70 guy probably is not as interested. Maybe that was their signal. And we gave the opportunity to all of them. So there was not a one-on-one or this or that. It was a direct there was a direct communication to all of them potentially that would have done it. And again, the real disappointment to me in this board is coming from the distrust in the process and the implication that some of us were under the radar or whatever. The estimator, the bidder that was bidding on this is a Central Middle School estimator that was brought into that project. That was the only reason I knew of this person, just to be very clear. this is not my business. So I would just appreciate if there was a little bit of trust that we could have with our colleagues. I know we sit next to each other all the time, and then we leave and we shake hands and we carry on. But to sit next to each other and kind of have these implications doesn't really feel that great.
I'll just make some, yes, Laura.
Sorry, I'm not going to talk about the process. I'll just say that I too am troubled by it. But on the substance, I do think that Ms. Moriarty has made some excellent points and that we do have new information. When this concept first came up, it was presented as a pilot project. We hadn't done this before. I think when we talked about it in March, there was a more sense of urgency that we were trying to get this done by early June or what have you, but the building committee did complete its work. It was presented to us at the end of June. And going back to the actual deliverable of the product, so the Central Middle School did do this cost estimate process. And really, the end result was that it was more or less a validation of what the work was that the professionals that the building committee has hired, which isn't a bad thing. But just having gone and seen that process develop, I just wonder, again, it's $15,000, but, we're also talking about not only doing the cost estimate for the renovation, we're also talking about something with respect to a new school, and I don't think that's included in the amount. So, I think from my perspective on the substance, we thought about it. We have new information. I don't think it's necessary to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
I just have to clarify, correct Laura's point there. So CMS did not do an independent estimate. They did a peer review. The independent estimate was actually voted down by the committee 2 weeks ago. The peer review was simply validating the existing estimate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I have to weigh in again. I'm sorry. I was the one vote when it was a negative. So my view here has been consistent, and it remains even more emphatically consistent. So it's been said a moment ago that, well, when you're building your own house, who would not go forward without a second bid? But this is not a second bid. Let's think of what this really is. If I'm building my own house, I go to a contractor and say, can you give me a rough estimate as to what it's going to cost to build a house? And they give me one. It's rough. The building specs have not been done. The drawings have not been done. Gives me a rough estimate. And somebody else comes across and says, for $15,000, I'll give you another rough estimate. I'd say, what, are you kidding? Why would I pay you $15,000 for something that's intrinsically got very little value, if any? Now, if I'm going to go to bid, and I've got all my detailed drawings, I've got the specifications, well, of course I want a second bid. That's a different story. That's every homeowner wants to do that. What we're talking about here, from the get-go, is of zero value. It's a colossal waste of money. And it's, if you want a rough estimate, it's been provided by the building committee. The building committee has been put in place by our first selectman, and we either trust what the building committee says or not, but you won't really know what a real number is until you have actual drawings, specifications, something that's concrete. So this process is, a fool's errand to begin with, and now it's been, in my view, unquestionably tainted. One conversation is one conversation too many, because the protocol said at no point will there be any conversation. So on that, I rest.
I guess I'm just troubled by the one conversation is one conversation. It was basically a phone call to introduce, and there was no other discussion. So I don't understand, how this is tainted by somebody just calling up and saying, here's Pete, and, I'm going to leave it to Pete. I just think that that's kind of I'm just flabbergasted by that. Look, I understand what you're saying, but if I recall when we did the fire study, I'm questioning who was talking to what, on the BET. And I don't, I think this is being really blown up and made into a political argument that really should not be a political argument. The question that we need to discuss today is whether or not we have value in proceeding with this estimator project, okay, or whether we don't. Now, we've heard from my colleagues across the aisle that they do not feel that there would be any value in spending this money to get additional information by which this board can make a decision. That's one decision. That's one opinion. Okay? We've heard from the other side of the aisle that there may be some merits in obtaining additional information with which this board can make an informed decision. Okay? And that's the other opinion and the other side of the aisle. I think that that's really where it rests, and we need to either decide tonight, yes or no, and whether it's a majority vote by one side or another, or it's a tiebreaker. That's where we are.
So Jeff, and, okay.
So it's worth noting that in the description that Mrs. Aurora brought forward, there were 2 conversations in which she places the phone call and she introduces and passes the matter to the controller. The fellow at the other end of the telephone would easily deduce from that his source of business is the lady who made the introduction. I have no idea what the conversations were or what they weren't. The whole point of the protocol, the way we established it, was that there was to be no conversations, so we don't have to have a dialogue about this was innocent, this wasn't innocent. There was to be a bright line, and that was to be no conversations. And as the story is relayed to us, that was breached at least twice by a BET member. So we've established that the bright line is not been kept.
But again, Jeff, I think what your definition of the bright line is not what's written on the paper. And that's, again, you might have a recollection, but if you look at what is actually written, I don't think that, legally you have an argument that it was breached. So, again, I think that we need to calm down a little bit and just.
May any member of the BET directly or indirectly communicate or confer with the estimator until such time as et cetera. Maybe I should repeat it with the microphone on.
But I think that the estimator has already been hired at that point.
You're raising the question of what's on the paper. Let's talk about what's on the paper.
I think you need to read the statements above it, because I think you need to realize that the estimator has to be hired at that point. And it's to avoid the conflict of basically influencing the conclusions of the estimator after they're hired.
No, at
Okay,
no
but
point
that's
has a
what it's
meaning.
that's what's written there. If you read the whole statement.
So I repeat my earlier point. Then it
Jeff.
doesn't matter how corrupting was the dialogue that might have taken place before
There
the
was
actual
no
hiring.
corruption, and
That
I
doesn't count.
take offense to that
I
language.
mean, one thing I'll just say, can I just say something? I think I say I, but we, because we're all here for the same amount of time, I think we've all been very patient and just making sure everyone has a chance to give their views. I really honestly feel that a lot of these views are being repeated and repetitive, so I would please.
I agree.
Okay, so I would please, I'll take the liberty of making a couple points. I'm going to try not to cover any of the points that have been currently made. First thing is, I would like to say, in terms of the document and the wording, I do think there's a little bit of a judgment call. I think some people can say they felt that meant there should be no dialogue ever. I think the wording does discuss that in the engagement process, not the hiring process. And again, I think clearly we have different views here as a board. Many people with different opinions and all knowledgeable opinions. So I think we just have to leave it at that. I think in terms of the issue about whether or not it makes sense to get new information, I also want to say I think that reasonable people can agree or disagree on that. I would, however, say I spent a lot of time thinking about the work that the Old Greenwich Building Committee did. I had many questions and comments during the meeting, and I know all of us did, and I commend both caucuses here for having opinions, and we spent a lot of time on June 23rd. We gave the building committee a lot of our time and a lot of our focus to really hear what was being discussed. I would, however, like to add one point that has not been mentioned. I'm sorry, and the other thing is, this is a pilot project, and I think we've always acknowledged that, and I think I have in particular. But the last thing I want to mention is, when we asked the RTM to approve the A&E money, the $1,086,000, we made this a condition. We signaled to them, this is something we would execute. And it is true that it has not been executed yet, and I want to add, I want to thank our town controller, Pete Winarski, for working very hard on this project, being very patient with all of us. It is a very unique kind of process where a board would ask a non-elected member to take on this burden and responsibility to select one of the bidders, and it's not an easy thing. I would note, I believe, on the Matrix situation, I wasn't on the BET, but I think there, ultimately, after the right RFP type process, I believe the BET itself affirmatively took a decision on who to hire. So I think there's a lot of unique things here. I think there's a lot of judgment calls. I will not be supporting this motion, and although I think there's a lot of judgment calls here, ultimately, I think this is something that we promised the community, the RTM, we would do. And I think, as being on the RTM for over 10 years, these conditions are taken very seriously. I do understand that if we determine that this condition cannot be satisfied, and of course, what's unique here is this is something the BET has to do. We're not asking anybody else to do it. So again, I do appreciate the reason for the motion. And however, for me, I feel that, this to me is a wake-up call that we need to get this done and started. But I will not be supporting this motion as is. So Nisha, can you call the question? Thank you.
Harry, I'll start with you.
No.
Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
David?
Yes.
I'm a no. Dan?
I'm a no.
Leslie Tarkington? Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
Bill Drake?
No.
Miriam Cruiser?
Yes.
Stephen Selbst?
Yes.
6-6. Motion fails.
I don't think it was 6-6.
Yes, it was.
No,
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed one. Okay. The motion fails 6-6. We have item 10, Old Greenwich A&E, discussion and possible vote to waive the condition referring to the BET cost estimated project funding of $1,086,000. I believe we have a motion. Leslie?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, though with your comments, I'm sure we already can anticipate the outcome, but the motion is to release the condition referring to the BET cost estimator project on the fiscal '24 Old Greenwich School architectural and engineering funding of $1,086,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, that's a motion by Leslie Moriarty, seconded by Jeff Raymer. Rationale. Thank you, Leslie.
So the reason I'm putting forth this motion, first of all, I was a little hopeful that we could not do the project, and therefore it would be logical to release that condition. But even if this project is moving forward, and we'll wait to see how it will move forward, I think that the BET set a terrible precedent during our budget negotiations and conditions in adding a condition to a department's request for funding that is totally dependent on the BET itself taking action. I think that is a first in the history of the BET. I've talked to a few people asking them if that's ever been done before, and I don't think people can recall. To add a condition to a department that the department has no ability to manage, control, understand the status, impact its timing, is unfair to the department. And therefore, I think the BET should release this condition, still can move forward with the project, but it should not encumber the $1,086,000 because the building committee does estimate it's going to run out of money come October. And I would not like this board, if we have trouble finding an estimator, if the project takes longer than we expect, that it's the BET itself that is hampering the work of the building committee. They don't need to be linked. So that's the rationale.
Thank you. Discussion? Jeff?
I wonder if through the chair, I could ask if any member of the BET, and I'm looking particularly at our representative on the building committee, Mr. Selbst, might know, but I'm curious, are we in a situation in which the committee will run out of funding without these funds and therefore end up having to stop work? Because I think that's a relevant consideration when we weigh this motion.
So, Mr. Rimmer, the committee is not imminently out of money. I mean, we have money certainly to continue through October of this year. After, we are, as I think members of this board fully aware, we are actively in the development stage, and we're now moving into the next stage of design of the actual facility. So the answer is we do need access to this money, certainly by the fourth fiscal quarter of this year, but it's not before the end of October.
Thank you.
Excuse me, end of
Thank you.
September.
Any other comments, discussion? Okay. Can we go to a vote?
Harry, I'll start with you again.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we're taking a vote, the motion to waive the condition.
Vote is no.
Laura,
Yes.
Karen,
No,
David,
Yes.
I'm a no. Dan,
I'm a no.
Leslie Tarkington,
No.
Leslie Moriarty,
Yes.
Jeff Raymer,
Yes.
Bill Drake,
Yes.
Yes.
6-6,
Vote is 6-6?
6-6.
Okay, the motion fails. Thank you. Okay. Item 11 is, would be a executive session to discuss responses to the Old Greenwich School Estimator RFQs.
Point of order.
I'd like to make a motion.
A point of order, if I may. The item certainly can be discussed, but I'm not aware of a basis in which it's properly the subject of executive session. I'm looking at the Connecticut General Statutes, which lists out at section 1-200, subsection, just a second, 6, that lists, and I'm going to paraphrase because it's long, but I invite anybody else to check. The items that are entitled to executive session is a discussion concerning an appointment, employment, performance of a public officer or an employee of the town. B, strategy or negotiations with regard to pending claims in litigation. C, matters which address security or the deployment of security personnel. D, discussion of the selection of a site for lease or the sale or purchase of real estate by a political subdivision. Or finally, E, discussion of any matter which would result in a disclosure of public records which are protected under, and then it cites another section. So we're not here discussing any of those items, and we're not the body that was entrusted to respond to an RFQ in the first instance. So I'm not sure I see a basis here for this discussion to be in executive session. We've already had a fairly ugly conversation here, but I would like not to be having whatever dialogue is going to take place. I don't think dialogues of that kind should take place out of the public view. There are things happening here that the public should have its right to see. And so I would object, it's a point of order, I would object to item number 11 being discussed in executive session. I believe there not to be a legal basis for it.
Leslie?
First, I would suggest that Mr. Raymer is out of order. The motion should have been taken first, and then I think we should have discussed this. But I'd also like to comment that I have never been involved, and I've been involved with quite a few, RFPs, RFQs, whatever, where those discussions have been held in the public forum until the appropriate vendor has been selected. So, while familiar with the sections that Mr. Raymer has read to us, it is also the practice of this town that our bids are held in confidence and the discussions on the particular vendors until that decision is made.
Thank you. I'd like to just comment on Jeff's point and try to think through a way forward here. So, the first thing, I think the assertion that we would try to be having some of these conversations outside the public, I as chair of this board, I don't think that's true, and I don't appreciate, because I think tonight here, we have had some pretty ugly, messy conversations about, a lot of things, and the parts of that discussion are unfortunately appropriate in a public environment, and that's what we did here. So it really concerns me that, as chair of this committee, of this board, that statement was made, because I am not, no one here is trying to prevent any appropriate conversation. Certainly, if we're having a discussion and being briefed on vendors and their proposals and bids, that should, I think we all agree, should be an executive session. But I think to Jeff's point, I believe what you're saying is that since, based upon the policy, we are not the body that will make this decision, that we have delegated what was our authority to our town or our project manager, and we did that in a policy in March. I think, Jeff, what you're saying is because of that, the executive session is out of order. And I suppose, you read the statute there. I do believe there's some rationale to that. So where I am on this is I think we can do two things. One is we can take that point of order and really end that discussion for tonight. The other, of course, is we could, with a 2/3 majority, add to the agenda the ability to edit a policy and say, for example, something like, on recommendation of the BET, the project manager will select somebody. Select a estimator. The only reason I say that is that if we can get this done tonight, then, because what I took really from this conversation is that this is a new type of project. More time has gone by than we would have already hoped in terms of making a decision. So if we can get 2/3 to agree to add, modifying the agenda, modifying the policy on the agenda, then we can vote on that. Hopefully, both votes win. Then we can go to executive session, hear about the bids, and then I believe at that point we would be with the point of order would be satisfied, and then ultimately potentially choose somebody. Otherwise, I'm very happy to do this as well. I think that we have, the whole summer to, talk through this, figure it out, such that we can get it properly on the agenda. If we want to potentially ask our town controller to, do a rebid, because potentially we have enough time, we can change the policy and have the BET make the decision. I, for one, when we created this policy where, the town controller accepted the burden of making this decision, I had envisioned situations where we had to decide within days or a week or two who an estimator would be. Clearly, that hasn't been the case. So realistically, maybe the right way really is to have the board decide like on every other situation. So all I would say is that I appreciate the point of order. We can either end it there for tonight and get on to our other agenda items, or we can modify the policy through a 2/3 vote, at least to put it on the agenda. So thank you all. Oh, yeah, Karen, you going to correct me?
Oh, no, I just, I'm a little confused as to where we are. Did we get a second to the motion to go into executive session so we can discuss it? Okay. I understand, but the point of order was raised before the motion was made and seconded. So just to Mrs. Tarkington's point, there's no motion on the table right now.
So I'll make the motion.
And I'll second it.
Okay, and I'm
And
going
I'll
to.
raise the point of order.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'll give my other comments.
And all the other comments are on the record towards this, okay. I'm going to suggest that we table this motion and that we take up a different motion, and that motion would be to direct our controller to just get new bids and end this conversation, and just kind of let him go back to the drawing board, start the process, get bids from people that he feels are appropriate, or just open up the RFQ, and then move on, so that there's no question about tainting the process from anybody's perspective. And I just have a little spider here that decided to make its little its little presence, okay? And then move on with the process. That's my motion.
Do we have to, what do we do with the existing motion? Don't we have to?
I'm asking that we table this motion, the existing motion, and we can either take a vote on it or, and then move on to my motion.
I'm fine with that. Are you fine with it? Okay, so we're
I'm fine.
tabling the original motion. Okay, and so Karen, I will,
And it could just be a recommendation from we don't have to tell Pete what to do. It could be a recommendation that he basically issue a new RFQ, start the process, and just get moving on this.
Let's take these one at a time, if we may. Is a motion to table for the moment?
yeah, or I
Unless
can, I mean,
unless the motion.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Unless the motion is withdrawn.
I'll withdraw it.
And I seconded that. I mean, I agreed.
Yeah, so I'm going to withdraw my motion. Okay, thank you. And do we have a second to Karen's motion for discussion?
So moved.
Okay. Karen-
Second.
So Karen Faciotis, Harry Fisher, for discussion, yeah. And I think you gave your rationale, Karen, correct? Yes. Thank you. Leslie?
So this is probably going to address the whole process. So let's say even tonight, we got through this issue of can we discuss the bids or not. I don't think as a board we would be prepared to act, because all members of the board don't have the proposals. So you would be asking the board members to really reach a conclusion without base information. So in any case, we would have, I think, to be fair to board members, if we're making the decisions, we couldn't make that decision tonight. You need to give people time to understand the bids, potentially ask questions, and then come back to make a decision. So that approach could be handled with your first motion, right? If we have a special meeting. Well, let me stop for a second. I'm concerned, if we're moving forward with this. If we wait until September, which is our next scheduled meeting, I am concerned for Old Greenwich Building Committee and the potential inability to move ahead with their funding, that they may have to put their consultants on hold because they can't continue to do work. And I don't think waiting for that information, I don't believe that that's this board's intent. So I'm a little concerned with the September timing. I don't know whether members of this board would consider a special meeting. But regarding the new motion on the table, we haven't let the controller speak, and I don't know whether, Pete, if you want to speak or not, but he had difficulty getting the respondents that he already had for this RFQ. So I'm not sure reissuing the RFQ is, one, going to solicit any new responses. It gives the current respondents time to reissue theirs or whatever else. We may end up in the same place, and maybe he has a comment on that, whether he thinks we would end up in a different place with a different pool of potential candidates, because I think that might affect how this board wants to move forward.
Pete, do you want to comment?
I agree with the motion to restart the process, and I could really look hard for a number of additional bidders at the $15,000 threshold. My question is what do I do with the current bidders? Just simply go back and tell them that there's a $15,000 limit and include them in the new batch?
I mean,
But I
that
agree.
seems reasonable to me, Pete. The only one thing I would just throw out about the 15,000 is we're all aware, and I think you are. I mean, the first bidder knew the 15,000 number because it's all public information. I mean, so I do appreciate there is always, people can question like how someone got information, but in the case of the 15,000, that's in our policy, it's in our minutes, it's in, It's in, anyone who listened to our meetings and recording, that 15,000 number's out there. So what I would say is, since for an RFQ, to me, it is the max that we, within the policy, we have the authority that, yeah, we should absolutely let people know that 15 is our number, and they should probably tell us what work they can, if they can accept the number or not. I don't know what we have to gain by not letting them know the number, but that's really still your call until we have a specific motion otherwise.
I'm okay to restart and search for new bidders.
Okay. So do we want to call the question? Oh, yes, Laura, of course.
I have to say, I'm a little hampered tonight because I don't have the policy in front of me, and it's not part of our minutes package. But I just want to revisit the scope of work that we're expecting. As Nisha correctly pointed out, what was done for Central Middle School was a peer review. So are we being realistic with the $15,000 and what we're allocating for and what we're expecting as a deliverable?
So I'll make one comment on that. Right now, in the new purchasing policy, well, first thing, we do have 2 bidders that said they could do that. We also know that the work that CMS Building Committee, although they called it a peer review, not an estimate, there was a considerable amount of work done there, and I think the committee generally liked the analysis that they saw and found it helpful. So it seems like 15 probably works. I would also note, however, that in the new purchasing policy, we're allowed to do up to 25,000 as an RFQ. Now, realistically, some people are questioning whether it's even worth 15,000. So I don't think we need to look at a higher number because we already had some interest at 15. So to your point, Laura, I don't know the answer, but I would still like to stick with the 15 personally.
So my data point is Central Middle School Building Committee was given a quote to do an independent cost estimate of 15 to 20 by the firm that they had hired. So that's one data point. The other concern I have is relating to what Ms. Moriarty said about our timeline and the ability of the Old Greenwich Building Committee to continue to do its work expeditiously with the funding that it has currently. So I just don't want to be in the same place in a special meeting, either in August or what have you.
Can I just add one thing to that, Laura? Based upon the policy, if the only reason we would need a special meeting or would be if ultimately when the rebidding process is done, our project manager is not comfortable making a selection. If we restart the process and our project manager is comfortable making a selection, no meeting is required. Our project manager will make a selection. If ultimately that it doesn't work out that way and ultimately the board would have to intervene and take a decision, then that would require a meeting in September. I mean, the project manager could get the bids in the next 2-3 weeks and just make a decision and select somebody, and it wouldn't require any meetings. Just from a point of order.
So sorry, last comment. I am not clear what the RFQ says. Is it, we're asking for an independent cost estimate for the renovation? Are we asking for an estimate for a potential new school based on what data set? I'm just trying to, for transparency. Okay, again, I don't have it. It's not
Okay.
posted,
Well, it was posted in the past, so, I mean.
it's not,
Okay.
it's not.
So,
Final version is not posted.
Pete, do you want to?
Final version is not posted and
By the
I'm
way,
locked
Pete,
out
do
of
you
my
want to
iPad.
comment?
I'll mail it to you.
So, by the way, I believe the March one is posted. I think the
I got it.
April one is pending the approval of the April minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay. So Pete, do you want to answer Laura's question?
Sorry, I missed the question.
What are we asking for in the RFQ?
What's the deliverable? What's the RFQ asking for?
It's this document here.
Can you just recite it? Could you just recite what
It's,
the,
Just the pertinent points. Just the pertinent points of what they're expected to bid on.
the renovation project for Old Greenwich School at 72,000 gross, 44,000 net square feet, gross square foot building, per the KD&G BOE master plan with a current enrollment of 406 students, 369 K through 5 and 37 pre-K, October 22. By the way, all of these bidders got them that document. It is recognized the Board of Education has responsibility to develop the educational specifications if a new school is determined to be the path the BOT chooses to pursue. Also, it is recognized that the cost estimator project is being prepared for and is only relevant for the purpose of understanding the context of the renovation of the old school. To answer your question, one, itemized estimate, provide estimate to renovate OG per the 10/21/21 BOE approved ed specs. Two, comparative analysis. Please share recent comps of similar size renovations and new school construction. Include comparable public schools in Connecticut in your analysis, and the analysis should also include other non-public school construction projects in the Greenwich area when available. Also, explicitly include an adjustment for construction inflation to the same period as itemized and estimate item number 1. 3, project risk. Share quantitative data of renovating older buildings and suggest areas and amounts of risk contingencies that should be included in the budget. Examples would be contamination, asbestos, etc. 4, estimates. The estimator should provide 2 estimates, one estimate for the renovation based on the ed specs in item number 1, and a second estimate for a new elementary school building for an equivalent number of students. The estimate should clearly identify the assumptions and methodology used. The second estimate for new construction should include required site work, paving, demolition, and other identifiable costs. The estimate should be provided in a final written report that includes identification of all the assumptions and methodology used to generate the estimates, including their source and ranges of variability and confidence. The estimator will use publicly available information on the project from the GPS and OGS Building Committee. Additional information requests will be referred through the project. So now that I have new information, when I send it out to the new bidders that came out within the last month, they will also get that information, which will make their job easier.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Okay.
Sorry, I appreciate that. Just one clarifying question on number 1. Did we say actual square footage, or did we say a building that would house the expected enrollment?
Yes, the final one, I mean, Pete must be working off something.
So this is my problem.
No, I understand. Okay, thank you. Okay, Nisha, can you call the question?
What, can I just make one request too? Just to avoid the same conversation that we have next time, can we, any leads that a BET member may have for an estimator, please just provide the name to Mr. Minarski, and please do not contact them directly, and then we can avoid some of this.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm sure Pete would appreciate as many leads as we or others can provide him. And that goes for the public as well if they're listening. Okay? Greenwich is a very good employer and a very good a very good municipality to have a relationship and do business with. So I would make that a pitch to everybody. Okay, thank you. And so the motion would be to recommend, and this is purely a recommendation for our project manager, is to restart the process. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just writing it down. Give me one sec. Okay. All right, so it's a motion to recommend to the controller to restart the process. And Harry, I'll start with you again.
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
David?
No.
I'm a yes. Dan?
I'm a yes.
Leslie Tarkington?
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty?
No.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
Bill Drake?
Yes.
Miriam Kreuzer?
Yes.
Stephen Selbst?
Yes.
10-2.
Thank you. Okay, based on that motion, items 11 and 12 will not be taken up. Thank you. Item number 13, new business. Vote to accept the June 30, 2022 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, ACFR, and the state and federal single audit. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so that's audit, so Leslie Tarkington, second from our audit committee chair, and Pete, Leslie Tarkington, Harry Fish, yeah.
Can I just make some comments?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to note that at the regular meeting of the Audit Committee on July 13th, we met with Scott Bassett and Melissa Quinn, who are the town's primary contacts with RSM, the town's auditor. The committee reviewed the comprehensive annual financial report for the year ended June 30th, 2022, the filing of which was partially delayed by a new requirement to account for leases, which I believe is FASB 87. GASB 87, sorry. But mostly due to the accounts receivable problems at Nathaniel Witherell. After review, the committee voted 4-0-0 to recommend that the BET that accept the comprehensive annual financial report.
That is my report also.
Okay. Any questions? David?
I would just like to take this opportunity to commend not only Mr. Minarski for shepherding this thing through with lots of challenges along the way, and for the leadership he's provided in the direction and so forth. And I'd also like to commend our chair of the audit committee in the same vein. I think this process was difficult this year, but I think there was a very excellent review, discussion, engagement, and I think it's an example of how the BET can and did work very well. So I just want to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, David. Any questions? Oh, Leslie?
I'd just like to add that, that in addition to Mr. Minarski, I know that Roland Geiger, our budget director, and Maureen Tracy and others in the department worked very closely with Pete during this period, and it has been quite a struggle, and they all deserve to be commended.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for that. Laura?
Just a quick comment. I know these documents are posted on our website, but I think we should send a link through the RTM distribution list, letting people know that they're there.
And can I get a motion to accept?
We got the motion.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry,
I
right,
already did
Leslie and Harry, okay.
Unanimous consent, maybe?
Can we accept this with unanimous consent?
Yes.
I'll take this opportunity to thank Pete and his team as well. So we're very pleased to get this done. Thank you. Okay, we're going to, 8:42, so I think no chair's report again. Item 15, approval of the BT regular committee meeting minutes. And, anyone can see there's 5 sets of minutes there, one in particular, decision day. It's a big set of minutes. So I want to thank everybody. I think this is a little on me as chair. I kind of fell behind on some of these minutes, and I know 2 of them are special minutes, special meeting minutes. So I do want to thank the board for their patience, but hopefully we can get these done tonight so we can have a better summer. And Pete and his team can have a better summer as well. So do we want to make individual motions? Okay. So can I get a motion to accept the June 23rd special meeting?
So moved.
I'll make a motion. Can I amend that motion, Leslie? To make it as amended, to approve the June 23rd minutes as amended? Because we
So
did receive change
I would
pages
just
today.
restate my motion to say as amended, Law.
Okay, Leslie
I'll
Dorkington,
second that.
Laura Erickson. Any objections? Okay, that's accepted with unanimous consent, 12-0-0. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the June 21 special committee meeting?
So moved. As amended?
No amendments on that one.
No,
Okay.
that's okay.
Okay, Leslie Tarkington, Laura Erickson. Any objections? Okay, that's 12-0-0.
No, you need 2 abstentions. I don't believe Nisha and David were at this meeting. Is this the June 21?
Oh,
Yes.
good catch. That's Nisha, Laura. And the second one? David?
David Weisbrod.
Okay. And also, obviously, Stephen was there by phone, but that's already in the minutes. Okay. Any objections? Okay, that's accepted by unanimous consent.
No,
Improved.
doesn't that need to be 10-02?
10-02.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, the June 7th regular meeting minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Leslie Tarkington, second. Laura Erickson.
That has to be as amended, Leslie. There was
As
one
amended.
change there.
As amended. I make my motion as amended.
Second.
Any objections? Okay, that's the regular, that passes.
You need 1 abstention. Stephen wasn't at that meeting, I believe.
Yep, you're
That is
right.
correct. 11-0, accepted, 11-0-0. Approved. Apologies, approved. Thank you. It takes a village, right? Okay. The next one, the April 14th regular meeting minutes.
April 17th, so
April
moved.
17th. As amended, I think.
As amended?
I'll second that, but I do have a comment.
Of course.
So this is the meeting where the final policy was addressed, I think, after all the motions. So it does say that the final version of the above edited version of the policy should be attached to the minutes. So the part of the amendment should include the policy being attached to the minutes
Correct.
and being posted.
Thank you. I think, Pete, we discussed that with Shira. as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
we did
Yeah.
discuss that.
It was
Okay.
the.
Okay. Can we get it? Can these be approved with unanimous consent? Okay, 1200. The April 4th decision day minutes
So
as amended.
moved.
Leslie
As
Tarkington
amended.
and Laura?
I will second, but I do have a comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I just saw these today, but on page 19 of the changes, I just want to note, and I'm not making any comment that these comments weren't said at the meeting, but before casting the tie-breaking vote, that language, I think it would be a little fairer if we just said the outcome would have been that the capital budget wouldn't have been funded and the operating budget would have reverted. I mean, you may have said all this, but I just don't recall. And I know there were a lot of other comments that day. It was a long day. We all had various comments on the budget, and not all of those comments were incorporated in the minutes. I do think in this case, the minutes should just be very factual. The result would be the capital budget wouldn't be funded and the operating budget would have reverted to the prior year. Just a comment. I'm not going to get hung up on it, but I did want to
Yeah,
make
no, I
that comment
appreciate,
for
I
the
mean,
record.
thank you, I appreciate that. I feel, and this was the thing I was thinking about a lot, I feel pretty strongly about those comments. I know last year, we kind of were in a similar situation, and, none of that were in discussion that I mentioned at the meeting was in there, and I do think it's important. I tried to keep it not too long, and I tried to keep it as factual as I could, but I would certainly like to retain the language as is. Thank you. Okay.
Related to that, would you consider adding a sentence which identified why the members of the Democratic caucus voted against the budget? I think we were pretty clear all along with why we voted against it, but, and the votes stand there, but your comments kind of raise a point that makes it seem like people were being irresponsible. And I think to allow one comment to identify why we voted the way we did would be a fairer presentation at the final vote.
I don't really think that's appropriate.
Let me say, since Mr. Ozesmer asked for the sentence, let me state it, and you can think about it, but it was, whether you attribute it to me, I can make it, or representing the caucus, voted against the budget because it does not support necessary capital investment requested by departments and boards, as well as not properly funding the multi-year capital plan. Those are the primary reasons we voted against.
The only reason, I would not.
You're not on.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate your suggestion. I would say, though, that the reason I would not accept that is that, in my discussion, it's all just factual. It's not about whether it's too much funding or too little funding, or whether it's adequately funded or not. I think that's appropriate in discussion, but I don't think it's appropriate in the minutes. So, okay. And by the way, just for everyone's clarification, the language in here, although when you saw your markup this afternoon, it showed it as an edit, this actually was the language that was in the packet presented on Friday. So this is the same language, just Shira and I had some confusion. So I would like to call the question. on
I have one other change, which it was in my email, and I think it's a quick clarification if Ms. Erickson could remember. But we have a motion to amend, this is Central Middle School on page 11 of the minutes. Ms. Erickson made a motion to condition the Central Middle School renovation project. And I believe to really properly present that motion, there should be a phrase afterwards, condition on what? So I don't know, Laura, if you remember what your proposal was.
I do, but it was very long. I mean, it was a multi-part, I mean, it's in the packet.
Is there a way to condense it to reflect it in here?
Probably, but I don't want to hold up these minutes, so let's see.
What page in the packet?
It's in the packet. You'd have to go in the order of the packet. I don't have that open.
Yeah, no, it's on page 42 of the decision day packet. It's right in the packet, so, yes, I mean, I would be happy to put it in. I don't know if I could condense it. It's not that much longer, certainly, than the North Street Bridge condition.
So that's at the bottom of page 42 and the top of page 43.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone has their packet. I'm happy to.
No, I don't.
So basically, it was subject to receipt of a complete information packet and presentation, including but not limited to conceptual designs, project estimate, a project schedule, and any recent reports received to date, and a couple of other things.
So it could say, subject to receipt of conceptual design, project estimate, and what were the other? two?
Project schedule and any, basically.
And other reports,
Yeah.
projects. So I'd add that phrase to the minutes if we can.
That's, I mean, it's a factual statement based upon the written conditions from the packet, so
Right,
I'm fine with that.
okay.
So
I
we
mean,
could-
I
we
mean,
could-
I'm speaking for myself, I don't know if everybody else is.
Yeah, so we can, make the changes to the minutes and circulate them, and if people have problems, we can revisit them, but at least something can be posted as approved.
And the content will be based upon what's written in the.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, correct. Okay, I'm supportive of that. Okay, so are there any objections as amended?
I'm not understanding what's going to be done. The minutes will include the amendment that is being offered to the minutes, and then we will approve the minutes as is with the caveat that the minutes that will be circulated will contain the amendment.
Correct. The
Correct.
condition, it's language on the condition and/or subject to release at the bottom of page 42 and top of
Right.
page 43. And, there will be an attempt to paraphrase that, to shorten it, but all the content will come from that paragraph.
Okay.
That's fine.
I already made a motion to approve the minutes as amended, and
And do
we'll
we want
include
to,
that, and then it'll be circulated.
do we want to do a roll call, or can we accept this with
I think
unanimous
we can
consent?
do it. Is there any,
Okay.
Yeah, I don't
12:00.
think there's any issue.
Okay, thank you. You know what? I think I'm going to do the chair's report, guys. No, I'm joking. Yes, any objections to adjourning? Okay, and wait, before we officially adjourn, I want to thank, it's been a long half year, and I want to thank everybody for all their hard work, and I truly do hope people do enjoy their summer, and I do hope that the gods let us enjoy the summer without any specials and all that good stuff. So thank you all very, very much. Thanks.